Alrighty, so we have the ongoing saga of a local journalist who just wants some access to some records, man. Phil Isle is the former editorial boss at the Providence Phoenix, which is now defunct, but Phil has been freelancing in journalism still, and he's been writing a story that'll let him tell you about it. He's been here before telling us about it, and now the local U.S. attorney is blocking his effort to get some diligence done, and he wants to complain about it. So I'm open ears, and so too should you be. How are you? It is Tuesday. My state of mind is that we should be playing hooky in this weather. That's what my state of mind is, to be honest with you. What about you? I've never faked a call-in sick in my professional career. That's why I got so many sick days stacked up. Thank you, Lord. But I could find a way to get a bad cold tomorrow. 70 in November. All right, let's go. Run down. Let's check it out. Yeah, this is interesting, don't you think? Did you follow any of this? Here's the headline. There was a rally for 3.5 hours, reportedly, on the City Hall steps yesterday, and here's Eyewitness News coverage of it.
For 3 hours, dozens, mostly silent, stood at Providence City Hall steps to protest.
We live in a city with black people in it, so why wouldn't we have proper representation on the police force?
We're just a better society when we're representative of the society we live in.
We have candidates that would be more than qualified to do the job.
NAACP Executive Board member Pilar McLeod says her group, along with community leaders, met with Mayor Jorge Elorza 3 times since August. They want the mayor to appoint a black police major, bringing the total numbers of majors to 4. Mayor Jorge Elorza released a statement saying the police department should reflect the diverse community it serves, but did not address whether or not he plans to consider appointing a black major.
We just know that with the trying times that are going on throughout the nation, we know having a major of color, someone with some power, someone that can give these kids something to look forward to.
Providence police confirmed that there have been 2 black majors within the last 2 decades.
It matters that these folks have turned out, and it matters that we stand with them.
We're going to keep on pushing until we get a black major appointed to the Providence Police.
All right, now I believe that the last woman that was in this package is Lisa Scorpio, who is a white woman who dialed my radio program today, weekdays noon to 3 on WPRO. We had a pretty comprehensive, almost full show conversation about this, and there was a lot of opinions from a lot of different places. Here's what Lisa Scorpio said, amongst many things, on the radio.
We have to build community relations. We have to make Providence a better, stronger community, and we won't do it unless we build the self-esteem of black people. Putting a black major in place, well-qualified people, as I said, only 30 black people on the whole force, only 1 woman.
On second thought, those voices may not match up. We'll do our diligence on that, and I apologize for that. But the opinions are still valid, right? No matter who offers them. And whether you're black or white, you're allowed to have an opinion on this. What bothers me is City Hall's reaction to it. Not that they didn't jump and say, okay, we're going to hire a black major. But we're committed to diversity, but there's a way to say, hey, listen, we understand the command staff needs to reflect the community. We have 1 Hispanic major on the command staff, and we probably ought to add a black major on the command staff at some juncture. But doing it right and doing it for the right reasons is important. And we'd like to open up the dialogue and continue the dialogue. But you don't get that from the Elorza campaign or administration. You don't get very much from the Elorza administration. And that's the problem with the Elorza administration. Moving on to the next item, here's a headline from last night's protest from the firefighters. The mayor had a fundraiser, and Paul Dowdy, the head of the firefighter union, explained why he and the firefighters were there protesting.
The Providence firefighters are here protesting a fundraiser that Mayor Elorza is having with the business community. We want to sound the alarm to those folks from the business community that the mayor's really being reckless and irresponsible with this lawsuit. Up to this point, he has not identified what the city will do if they lose or where he'll get the money from. Our estimates are it'll be $10 to $20 million in damages, and yet he's identified no place where he's going to get that money.
You know, Paul is one of the more earnest union representatives. He appears on this program often, and his arguments are salient. There's absolutely no way, in my humble judgment and in the judgment of people really watching this case, that the mayor's administration and the city of Providence taxpayers won't get their heads handed to them in this appeal to the Supreme Court. He's appealing to the Supreme Court, a lower judge's decision to send this case to arbitration. And an arbitrator is going to look at the case and say, these guys have a contract, so you move from 4 platoons to 3 platoons, you got to pay them accordingly, and it's going to cost about that much. Here's the thing that the firefighters do not need to be doing. Do not go to fundraisers and yell, loser, coward. Don't yell things at the mayor. You guys are sitting in a pretty position, a pretty good public relations position. Don't destroy it by acting like bad guys. The act is getting old. The arguments are winning one. Stick to it. All right. So the Journal moves along and continues to chronicle their latest interview at length with Governor Gina Raimondo. And so as they piece that together in the Providence Journal on the front page, they ran this headline today: details scant on placement and size of truck tolls, which is not new news, right? This is a reminder that there are no specifics in the Gina Raimondo plan. That's a problem. She said the same thing on Newsmakers recently.
All I'm asking for now, what we're
only $1 billion.
No, it's a big proposal. What we're asking for now is legislation to enable us to do tolling for trucks on bridges. Then next year, all next year, will be about a public process to figure out how many tolls, where will the tolls be. The Federal Highway Commission has to do this big study to figure out, to make sure the math works. We set the right toll and it comes in, and then we do the tolling.
Governor, we cannot plan or pass a concept. You can't pass a concept. You must do the diligence on a toll plan of this significance in order to get it passed. You can't say, hey, how about tolling for revenue stream, and then we'll get to the details about how many tolls and how much later, and leave it wide open for unregulated, mitigated, voted upon discretion. This governor has such a backwards plan here. She's very confident and humorous about talking about it, isn't she? I beg her to come back here on this set. I beg her to come back here on this set so we can talk about it. I will tell you, this is the worst idea I've seen for a grand strategy in Rhode Island in a dog's age. Ugh. All right, the president had a little fun at the expense of the Republicans. You remember the CNBC debate the other night? They got pictures. There's Donald and Rubio and the leader to his right, who's now got a 6-point lead, Dr. Carson, and there's some of them taking pictures. Well, the president had a little bit of a moment yesterday, and frankly, I thought he kind of owned the moment.
Have you noticed that every one of these candidates say, Obama's weak, he's Putin's kicking sand in his face. When I talk to Putin, he's going to straighten out. Just looking at him, he's going to be. And then it turns out they can't handle a bunch of CNBC moderators. I mean, let me tell you, if you can't handle those guys, then I don't think the Chinese and the Russians are going to be too worried about you.
All right, look, dissenters, Obama dissenters will be infuriated by that commentary. Listen, we have people of all political persuasions that work for this show on this side and on that side. But I will tell you this, the president makes a point, and it's a opportunistic point, but a point nonetheless. His timing and delivery in moments like this is exquisite. And the truth of the matter is that it's a lot more complicated than the Republican candidates have suggested, meaning Putin et al. All right, including the Donald, by the way. And of course, LeBron has reached a milestone. LeBron James, as you know, there's a headline here somewhere, right? Youngest ever to reach that point scoring total. And he explains the diligence he puts into his work, even as a character in a movie. Well, there's LeBron, bang, he's, inside, outside, wherever he happens to be. He's unstoppable, no doubt about it. He's also in the movie Trainwreck with what's Bill's last name? Bill Hader from SNL.
What I'm saying is you got to go for it. Listen, Aaron, you need to focus if you want to take it to the next level.
Right.
You have to. Like, you got to give it everything you want if you want this one, man. It's like when I lost the championship in 2011, I worked on my game twice as hard, worked on my post-up game, and we wound up winning the championship twice.
Yeah.
You know what, though? Look, I don't have the data in front of me, but he shoots a lot. He shoots a lot. But there's no doubt how terrific an athlete he is and how he has changed everything in Cleveland and just about everywhere he has been. Your state of mind is important to us. 228-1886. Email us at stateofmind@myritv.com. Tweet at us, Facebook post. Here's a funny tweet. In reaction to our pretty deep conversation on white privilege, both in the rundown yesterday and on the radio. I like when people have a sense of humor about the important matters. When we come back, a local journalist who's frustrated as heck. Stay with us. So we last left Philip with his effort to he's just trying to write a book, man. He's just trying to write a book. He's just trying to access some public records that are public. Look at this document. Now, our good U.S. attorney, who I have profound respect for, has signed off and said this complaint ought to be dismissed. What complaint? Well, we'll explain the complaint. Phil Isle is back, former managing editor?
News editor and staff writer.
At the Providence Phoenix, a paper that we miss desperately. Sometimes you don't know until they're gone, how much you miss journalistic efforts. It hasn't helped the community to have one less voice, but we've had that conversation a couple times over. Good to see you again. You're teaching at RISD and keeping yourself busy journalistically on a freelance basis, correct?
Yeah, I was freelancing after the Phoenix closed, kind of until school started, and now I'm plenty busy teaching 2 classes at RISD in the English department there.
Good. And you've been working on this book. Give us the 2-minute overview on this book that you've been trying to write.
Yeah. So a guy that my dad went to college and med school with is currently in prison for 4 consecutive life terms for being, according to the U.S. government, one of the most prolific prescription drug dealers in U.S. history. That is the story. I learned about this before his trial in 2009. I interviewed him. I interviewed a bunch of people in the area where he was working. The trial happens. Another story, get kicked out of the trial. But forgetting that for a second, after the trial ends, I say, hey, can I see the evidence that the jury saw? Which you would think in this country with our rules about courtroom transparency and the 6th Amendment saying everyone gets a public trial wouldn't be too tall of a task, especially in an administration that claims to be the most transparent administration in history, as the Obama administration frequently touts. Some 4.5 years later after the trial ends, I am still trying to get access to this trial evidence. And the photo you showed is from a lawsuit response. With the help of the Rhode Island ACLU, I sued the Drug Enforcement Administration in the spring. And just a couple weeks ago, the DEA, via its local attorneys, the Rhode Island U.S. attorney, filed a response saying, we don't think this complaint has any merit, and please dismiss it.
Well, people are going to be curious, and I can't remember. I think I learned it, but I can't remember. Why were you not given access to the courtroom?
I really don't know the answer to that question. I know that on day 4 of an 8-week trial, I was going to be there for at least the first couple weeks. I was in graduate school at the time. I went out into the hall during a break, and a guy who I later learned was an FBI agent handed me a subpoena that said, for testimony, you need to be here tomorrow at this time. According to the piece of paper, I was going to testify. And once you're on the witness list, you can't go back into the courtroom.
Why would you be testifying in a case you're trying to write about?
That's a really good question.
Because you interviewed the defendant?
Well, I don't think they ever actually wanted me to testify.
You think it was a tactic?
Turns out they didn't ever call me to testify, and they successfully prosecuted this guy to a conviction anyway.
Are you worried that that's a tactic in the federal court system? That
in my case it is. I'm absolutely worried about that. This whole thing is worrisome. You know, courts are supposed to be open in this country. We're supposed to be able to see the people and this is the United States versus Paul Volckman. Every single U.S. citizen is a plaintiff in this case. We ought to be able to see who we are putting in prison and why. It's not that advanced of a concept. It's the foundation of this country. And in this case, the U.S. government and us and our taxpayers paid for a guy to go to prison for 4 life terms, and we still haven't seen why, really.
So, with the help of the ACLU, you sue to get these documents?
Yeah, to get trial evidence.
To get the trial evidence. Is there precedent, remind me, is there precedent for this kind of evidence to be released on a regular basis?
You know, I've had plenty of time to dig into this, and if you go to the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press, they point to a U.S. Court of Appeals decision over 30 years ago that rules, once the evidence has become known to members of the public, including representatives of the press, it would take the most extraordinary circumstances to justify restrictions on the opportunities of those not physically in attendance at the courtroom to see and hear that evidence. That sounds like precedent to me. That's a court decision that says, once you show stuff, you can't unshow it.
Have you found any precedent where this kind of suppression of evidence has occurred before? Of its kind, that which was introduced in the trial, the jury made a deliberation on, but an outside journalist wanted to come in and kind of review the case documents and was turned down?
I haven't looked into that specific. I don't know if there are other reporters who've been similarly boxed out. I do know that my case, unfortunately, fits into patterns when it comes to the Obama administration's treatment of the press. For example, at one point, after a lot of people had said no to my requests, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Well, the Obama administration, according to the Associated Press, has set records for their poor performance when it comes to Freedom of Information Act requests. And this is after the president said on his first day in office in a memo, the Freedom of Information Act should be administered with a clear presumption. In the face of doubt, openness prevails. That's the president saying one thing and doing another thing. Seems to me if you're applying the standard of these presumption of openness, as he encouraged all of his agencies to do with the Freedom of Information Act on his first day in office, if I were administering that to previously published trial evidence, that evidence would be released immediately. So not only is this confusing on a basic legal level with the Sixth Amendment, but even in a Freedom of Information Act level, they're saying, when in doubt, release. Why is trial evidence that's already been shown in an open court, why does that not apply there? I don't know.
It's puzzling. We'll talk about the local aspect of this when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Phil Isle is a journalist, adjunct professor at RISD these days, and the attempted author of a book. Do you know what the name of the book is going to be?
I don't know one yet. Right now it's stonewalled.
Right?
But
well, you know what? Looks like you might have 2 books. You originally wanted to do a review of a case with this prolific drug prescription prescriber. And for people who want to look up the story, the gentleman's name is?
Paul Volckman, V-O-L-K-M-A-N. He's in federal prison in southern Indiana.
But he's from Ohio.
No, well, he was living in Chicago. His criminal activity took place in southern Ohio.
Okay.
Went to college and med school with my dad.
And you're just curious about the case, want to write about the case, and now you can't get the cumulative evidence that's already been exposed to the public and the jury about the case, which is just too much. I wonder if the federal court system, by the way, ever will modernize this kind of information, in the sense that why not just put it in public storage?
It's interesting you bring that up. I forget what year it was. I think it was 2007 or 2009. One of the 9/11 co-conspirator prosecutions, a guy named Jeffrey Massaoui, was prosecuted in the federal court in Eastern Virginia. and there were some 1,100 trial exhibits, of which the government created a website and posted them all, with the exception of like 7, like less than 1% they posted. And they kind of trumpeted it. You could still go to the website. You know, this is the first time in history we're putting trial evidence online, and they set a gold standard that they never kept. That's one of the other reasons this is so frustrating, is that trial evidence in high-profile cases has been published by the government in another district. Why can't we do it here? This was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court.
All right, so you're a Rhode Island guy with an interest in a Chicago guy who got who was prosecuted in the Midwest and reportedly did his nasty deeds in Ohio, but you file in Rhode Island.
At this point, everything becomes a Rhode Island story if you wait long enough.
So Peter Neronha, the U.S. Attorney, who I have to tell you, I have profound respect for. I think he's a clear thinker. He provides access. He's user-friendly for the media. You know, he's been on the program. There's a picture of him. He put away. Well, he didn't put away. He
sent Gordon Fox to prison.
He sent Gordon Fox to prison. You brought pictures. Just he didn't send Buddy to pick.
Well, no, that office did. The Rhode Island U.S. Attorney office did. Yeah.
Right. So just for flavor, Phil wanted us to point that out. Well, but he has respectfully submitted that this case ought to be dismissed. Have you had any access to him personally? Just say, Peter, what up?
I wish, but you know, lawsuits don't work that way.
Right.
I will say that this whole thing has been an insult, and it's been embarrassing. I'm ashamed. I'm angry. I'm upset. I feel like I'm going crazy. And when I saw this filing by my own state U.S. attorney saying that my complaint for access to evidence that had been shown in a courtroom was non-legitimate and should be dismissed, you know, that was just an added layer of whatever you want to call it.
Do you think, have you had any moles? Did you feel like he's just going through the motions for the boss?
It honestly doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because his name is there saying this complaint should be dismissed. And people should be asking that office, what's going on?
Do you have any instinct that he just doesn't want to die on the hill, but you know, could wink and nod and say, Phil, you got every right in the world to these documents?
Our tax dollars fund the operations of the Rhode Island U.S. Attorney's Office. That means I'm paying for my ongoing stonewalling. That's what's going on here.
Well, you know, I'm happy to make our own inquiry to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
They should at least be able to. I'm sure they'll say we're in ongoing litigation, we can't comment. But, and this is why I appreciate you having me on here, this case should not be in the shadows. This should be in the spotlight, because it's an example of glaring transparency issues. Our country, unfortunately, in this year, 2015, can't live up to its most basic principles.
Have you been able to get a national platform for this conversation?
I'm working on it. A whole nother conversation is the invisible conversations I've had with journalists via email and phone, and some of the responses. And frankly, the apathy I've gotten from a lot of journalists, that's a whole nother conversation.
Well, give me 10 seconds of it.
Well, I mean, I've just learned a lot about how journalism works. It's too insidery. This sounds like an interesting case, but we can't do a story until you get the documents, when the story is why I don't have the documents. I've gone, you know, I've gone for months with various publications, including one that ended up doing a story about courtroom transparency in the Hulk Hogan sex tape trial, but passed on this case.
All right.
I appreciate you having me back.
We'll ask the U.S. Attorney, why? Peter, why? He just wants some records, heaven's sake. All right, I'm sure you'll be back on this.
Well, thanks
Hang
for having
in there.
me.
Keep at it.
Thank you.
Final word and we can back. Stay with us. On the Speaker's view on white privilege, the NAACP director tomorrow here. I'll see you on the radio as well at noon on WPRO. Bye.